I am a stage 4 cancer survivor, and most of the cancer that happens in India is avoidable cancer. If everything goes well, in the next 5 years, we will have the world's largest cancer biorepository.
As you thought about your career aspirations, you would end up as a chief procurement officer because that's a big job. It's a C-suite. I mean, it is a C-suite job.
Can I live up to those standards, right? Was the question, in my mind.
How are you doing? How was your weekend?
All good. I just got back from India. I remember we were talking about the project that I was pitching with the National Cancer Institute in India. I had that presentation on the 8th to the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, and it's a unanimous. If everything goes well, in the next 5 years, we will have the world's largest cancer biorepository in this, and a dedicated research division, which will be the biggest in the country.
That's amazing. And were you in Mumbai or Pune?
I was in Nagpur. Which is in the central part of India. It's
Okay.
so that's where this will come up, and I will need to lead it. Right. I mean, of course, I'm not going to lead the research. Of course, hire some top-notch chief science officer and all of that, but lead it from a getting it going.
How did you first get turned on to this problem? Cancer research specifically, was there something that happened that just really inspired you there?
I'm with Johnson. I was with Johnson Johnson for
Yeah.
12 years. J&J is a large, innovative pharma company with almost like a $30 billion portfolio just for cancer research. The second is very personal, and I am a cancer survivor, as you know. I am a stage 4 cancer survivor. I don't keep it confidential. I've shared it. It's actually better if people talk about it. And so as a part of that, I got involved with this organization almost 4 years back, year and a half, 4 years back.
What's the organization called?
National Cancer Institute in India. Yeah.
Mm.
The NCI for India. So it's a not-for-profit. Primarily, it is a 700-bed cancer hospital, which started in 2014. And my intent or my thinking was that, you have this concept of comprehensive cancer centers here in the US, which is basically the US NCI, not to be confused with the NCI of India. The US NCI designates hospitals as at various levels. And the highest designation is comprehensive cancer center.
Right.
The way to become a comprehensive cancer center is you need to be good at 3 areas. Patient services, which is making sure that you can administer the standards of care at the highest possible standards to any patient who walks in. That's patient services. The second is education, which is educating fellows, oncologists, also educating patients. Right? So that's the second part of a comprehensive. To become a comprehensive cancer center, you need to demonstrate the highest levels of proficiency in that area. And the third is research, right? Because as we know, cancer is not one disease; it's many diseases that put together. Even within an organ, like let's say breast cancer, there are so many types of cancers, and having research, education, and patient services under one roof, operating at the highest possible levels of excellence, has a significant impact in eventual patient outcomes. In fact, in the US, there's been many studies which show that patient outcomes from comprehensive cancer centers are 35 to 70% better than non-comprehensive cancer centers, right? So that was the thinking that, hey, can we create a research like there's already a patient services like which is up and running.
Yeah.
There are plans to drive education. So my thinking was, or my role was to work with NCI India in creating a whole research division, so that all three aspects of good cancer care sort of move forward. I started working with them almost like 3.5 years back, but in the last 6 months, I dedicated a large part of my time in creating a business case. I mean, although the word business case is a misnomer because it's a not-for-profit, so you're not
Right.
make. But even for a not-for-profit, when you're embarking on something which is significantly capital intensive, like research and capital in cancer, there has to be a sustainable model, right? And
Or
that other will fall by the wayside very quickly. So that's what I was trying to create, and that was the business plan, quote unquote, that I presented, and which now we will be moving forward.
That's really exciting. Well, congratulations, and I guess thank you for all of your good work. I mean, it's really amazing to see. And in terms of making the business case work, I mean, I think I have a million questions. I know we've talked about this before, but what do you feel like the big gap is right now at the National Cancer Institute, where you feel like, hey, like this new area of research? Because I remember it was something about specifically creating some kind of biomarker repository. I'm not a biologist, and so, but I remember that there were some specific things to Indian genome that, if studied a little bit better, you think could provide better outcomes. I'd love to understand that a little bit.
Benson, actually, it's not just about this specific organization. Like in general, cancer research in India lags behind the rest of the world.
Mhm.
It's a known issue. Now, the disease itself, it's very unfortunate, but India has the gold medal, the silver medal, and bronze medal in the wrong place. What I mean by that is the incidence wise, India is number three, okay, in the world,
Okay.
behind the US and China. So absolute incidence, right? And then you look at the mortality, we are number two, right? So
Right.
number of deaths because of cancer, India is next only to China.
Mhm.
And and then if you look at the ratio of mortality to incidence, India is number one amongst the top 10 high incidence countries in the world. So which basically means that, and that is 65%. Just for perspective, in the US, it is 25%, which means if someone is detected with cancer in India, odds are that they will succumb to the disease in 65% of the cases, whereas it is 25. So it's almost like, 3 times more chances
Yeah.
of, of potential death in India versus, let's say, in the US. And this is based on a registry which is only 10%. Okay, so only
Right.
10% of the cancer cases are actually reported in India. And most of them, as you know, based on your work in India, most of them tend to be urban.
Of course. Yeah.
Rural cancer is not reported. I don't have any data because it is not reported. But if you were to, I mean, it's not that difficult to hypothesize that if you were to add rural data in, those numbers will only get worse, right? And the nature of the disease is very different in India versus let's say the US, right? So US cancer is largely a disease of the aging, right? So prostate cancer, for example, amongst men
Right.
is almost a third of the total incidences of cancer, which comes with age. In India, it's unfortunate, but cancer is primarily a disease of the young, and most of the cancer that happens in India is avoidable cancer. What I mean by that is the number one cause for cancer in India is a habit, and that is tobacco,
Right.
right? So oral tobacco consumption and smoking, right? Those are the two. So tobacco is the number one. So a third of male cancers in India uh, come from tobacco. And then the other big reason for cancers in India is also avoidable, which is infectious reasons. So, for example, cervical cancer, right? So so there are other cancers which come from infections, which
Right.
are, I would consider, avoidable because there are vaccines available. So with the right level of awareness and with the right level of adoption of these vaccines, we could avoid those cancers, right? So that's the nature of the disease is different in these two countries, even where it is common. For example, breast cancer is the number one cancer amongst women in both the countries. But breast cancer in the US is mostly is postmenopausal women, whereas in India it's almost a decade earlier. So late 30s and early 40s is when women in you see breast cancer incidence, which again shows that
Yeah.
the epidemiology needs to be studied, needs to be understood better as to why that is happening. And I'm sure there are good reasons, but those good reasons need to be identified, and then strategies need to be planned across the full spectrum, right? So it's not
Right.
just treatment; it's awareness, it's early diagnostics. The other data point is that most of these cancers are detected very late. So diagnostics, affordable patient care, and then maybe palliative care. So all of those areas need to be evaluated and studied, and that's the reason why research in India on cancer is critical. So it's not just NCI, or it's not. I mean, in general, there is a problem. The problem is different from what we see elsewhere. Of course, we can learn and we will build on research from elsewhere. Needs to have India specific research to solve this major problem.
No, it's interesting. And how much overlap versus well, thanks for sharing this, Shashi. How much overlap versus difference do you think there will be longer term between the research that's happening in the United States at like a Johns Hopkins versus the research that's happening in India at the National Cancer Institute?
I think it's a great question. The point is, it will build off each other. So basically, it's not like this is a different research and there's a different research and there is some Venn diagram. The reality is that most of the basic research, I don't think, for example, National Cancer Institute in India would get it. Most organizations of that nature would rely on basic research from the John Hopkins of the world, right? But what you would need is what I would call as translational research. So taking that basic research and identifying the kind of problems that I just talked about, and then seeing how can we translate these bench-side insights into bedside, actions in a way that is very effective for the specific problems in India, right? So it's more on the translational side that research will start. Now, it's almost impossible to draw a partition and say that this is translational and this is basic.
Sure.
We will not do basic. It's not possible. But we've identified 4 or 5 critical research areas that need to be understood better to improve patient outcomes in India. Whatever is the basic research needed for that, we may do locally. But otherwise, we will be relying on research. Research is a very collaborative game. Work will happen all over the world, and it builds off each other, and that's what is going to happen. And the work that happens in India will be of benefit to the rest of the world as well. For example, you mentioned biorepository, right? We would be one of the aspects of this is to set up a biorepository, which would become the world's largest cancer biorepository. So what it means is that it's not just a physical storage of tissue and blood, etc., but it's also annotations, right? It is the genomic data, all the multi-omic data that comes with it, the patient, the EMR information, all of that is in the form of almost like a digital twin of the sample. Is all of this data that can be of use anywhere in the world, right? So I think there is benefit both ways, and it's a collaborative. Most research tends to be highly collaborative, and that's how it would be.
And one of the sort of the keynote hallmarks of a biorepository is that and maybe folks don't know this, but you're actually storing the physical tissue samples, not just
Yeah.
the data. And so is the thought that that would then be used by the institute for research as drugs are being developed and you want to sample across a broader range of tissues. I'm sort of curious how the link between the biorepository and the outcomes,
Yeah, so a biorepository is typically the starting point for many of these. So let's say you are a principal investigator. You're starting research in a specific area, and let's say you're looking for a specific head and neck cancer for a particular type, a male 50 plus who was suffering from Lynch syndrome and hence has had a tumor in his intestines, and you would want to start with that. And so that let's say that's the kind of profile. If you have that tissue, first of all, collected in the right way, which means it has been collected using all the right protocols, but also with all the ethical checks, right? So there's a lot of ethics involved in all of this. So let's say you have that sample, and then you have that sample annotated with all the information that you need, and that is the starting point for any researcher, right? So the sooner they can get access to such samples, the faster would be the research. Many times you have researchers who are stuck because they want a specific, let's say, pediatric sample, and there are not enough patients, or at least even if there are patients of that nature, they're not the sample is not being stored, or they don't have access to it. So as a result of which, the research might wait for like 2 to 3 years, sometimes 4 years, many years, right, before they can even find adequate number of samples to get to start their work. We're hoping that one of the many things that this research initiative will accomplish is that it'll accelerate that kind of investigations.
It's amazing. I'll just share just a small tidbit. When I started at Harvard Business School, the first case that we read for the entire class of for my entire class was actually about a heart hospital in India that was founded in Bangalore, and how they were actually able to perform more surgeries than the Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic combined, and we're talking like complex heart surgeries, like bypass, for about $2,000, which is like orders of magnitude less than similarly equipped hospitals, even in India. And so they sort of thought of it as I mean, I don't know if this is not the same direction necessarily, but the Walmartization of healthcare, and that sometimes if you bring technology or maybe just really good business thinking, that can disseminate medical care in a much more impactful way in a developing country where your dollar can stretch way farther. I mean, if you think about it from the utilitarian perspective, especially, like the same amount of effort and resources could, potentially save thousands of lives if it's done in the right way. And this is sort of that marriage of research and business.
No, absolutely. I also read that case study.
You did?
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Devi Shetty and his Narayana Vidyalaya is the which basically transformed. We're not looking at Walmartization and in research that I wish we could. I don't think that is. But I think that, to your point, the core insight is still the same, which is that what that hospital was doing was that it understood what was the needed, okay, by the patients in a particular geography,
Yeah.
sort of created a whole activity system that could deliver against those patient needs at costs. And obviously those costs are an important parameter,
Yeah,
right, in a country like India, right?
of
But
course.
without compromising on quality, right? So patient outcomes, as that study clearly highlights, the patient outcomes are actually on par or sometimes even better than the rest of the world, right? So it's the same concept here, that let's look at the unmet patient needs in India and South Asia primarily, and then understand what might we be doing differently to help address those patient needs, which includes costs, one of the parameters, in such a way that we can address those patient needs, and at the same time do it in a way that is equitable, and the access
Mhm.
is possible for all strata of the society.
No, it makes a ton of sense, and it's very exciting work. I'm kind of curious if there's a tie-in between your world as a procurement leader and the work that you're doing now for the National Cancer Institute. What's the where there must be many relationships there, but I'm curious like where your prior life comes into play. Oops. That was an accidental triggering of an emoji. I didn't mean for balloons to appear. It's a very serious subject, but
Yeah, no, no, no. It's absolutely. Look, I mean, my role as the chief procurement officer at Johnson & Johnson was to make sure that we understand what the needs are at within J&J, and then find capabilities externally that could help meet those needs, and do it in a way that makes business sense, right? That makes it sustainable on an ongoing basis, right? That is the core role of any buyer anywhere
right.
in the world, and it's to some extent similar here. I wouldn't say this is the buyer's role, but my role here is to establish a strategy that will help identify capabilities. Some we may build in house, some we will sort of tie in with wherever that capability exists to meet the needs of the patients in South Asia, in India, and some of those countries, adjacent countries. So that is the objective. It's more of a business, quote unquote, business role, because, as I said, it's a not for profit.
Sure,
Got that.
sure.
But how do we do this in a sustainable way is an important question, and that's what we will be striving to achieve.
What's the key unlock on the business so far? If you can share, like I agree with you. In India, the economics are really important. And sometimes when folks are living on a pretty meager salary and there's not always the kind of resources to go around that folks want, $2,000 for heart surgery sounds cheap by American standards, but it's still far more than what an individual is capable of paying. And so I'm kind of curious, how do you make the model sustainable? How do you get to a place, where you're able to actually make things like the biorepository a solvable business?
I think there are two aspects. One is quantitative, in the sense that it's a bit unfortunate, but it is also a fact that we have lots of patients. Yeah, because we have lots of patients, we have lots of samples. And
Right.
because we have lots of samples and if we collect them in the right way, if we store them in the right way, if we get all the consents, with the highest possible standards, global standards, then it is something that we can do better than anyone else because we
Right.
have that flow, right? And it's
Right.
very unfortunate that we have that inflow, but it just creates a stream of different types of very diverse cancers that we could easily reposit, right? So that's
Right.
one. I would call that the quantitative advantage
Event. Sure. Sure.
that we have. Right? The second is, I think, the strategic vision. I think the National Cancer Institute and the overall the trust that runs this organization
Right.
is very committed to research and to education and to patient services. So all three
Mhm.
legs of the solving the cancer problem, right? Those three are the all three have to be addressed, and the strategic direction from the board and the has been very unwavering, right? That we have to do this, and therefore willing to put resources. Because while I say that it is sustainable, we know that we'll have to invest quite a bit, okay, in the first 3 to 4 years before we generate other revenue streams to make it work.
No, I think it makes sense. Well, I really wish you the best of luck with your endeavor. And, more than anything, if there's ways that I can be helpful, I mean, outside obviously this specific podcast, like I'm always happy to help. At minimum, when you send me the donation link, know that there's going to be a check coming that is right sized to a startup founder salary. But nonetheless, it would be my joy to support you in this effort because I think there's often times where I mean, like, look, I had a business where we were trying to do something to make lives better in India. I care very much about it, and sometimes I think, okay, maybe let's first make the money and then I can use it. You know what I mean? Like maybe that's the right order. But basically, I think something that always surprised me was the metrics that try to equate between different diseases. And there's a metric that I love from the World Health Organization called DALYs, disability adjusted life years. And the interesting thing is that it's a mixture of how long an illness will impair your life, how severely will it impair it, and so things like cancer that are late onset, late in life, has actually a much lower dailies implication than if somebody gets it very early in life. And then there's certain illnesses like tooth decay, the one that I was really focused on, where it would happen even in childhood. And so it could
But
affect you
yeah,
for a very long period of time in so many different ways. And there are now more and more links between oral infections and things like heart disease, which is like a shocking and poorly understood link. The only thing we know is that these things do go in pairs, but not exactly the mechanisms for why, the pathways for why. Although I haven't followed the research in the last few years, so maybe this is dated. Like, this is a procurement podcast, not a medical podcast.
although we've not even mentioned the word procurement.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. People know about the 7-step sourcing process. I think they want to see what folks do with. I mean, because I think this is one of the things that I think people always think about in life and career, right? Which is like, okay, I mean, a lot of times I feel that people don't get started in procurement by design. They sort of find their way there by accident. And then the question becomes, okay, I'm early in career procurement, where's that path lead me, right? And then it's like, okay, well, if you do all the right stuff, eventually you can reach. I mean, you've reached the echelon of chief procurement officer of an iconic global 2000 business, Johnson and Johnson. And then the question is, okay, well, once you do that, what can you do with it? And so I think it's a very I don't want to say inspiring because that's so trite, but it is a very illuminating kind of trajectory that you've sort of and a path that I think you've carved for people that isn't an obvious one, which is, hey, even once you've reached this like career precipice within the industry, well, one, you can get there. And then two is like, okay, can you have some kind of broader impact if you want to, soothe your soul in a much broader way and give back to the people that weren't as lucky to have the opportunities that you had. And I think it's just wonderful. And you know what? Like there's two sides of commerce. There's buying and selling. And so, if you can do one of those two things really, really well, then I think you could be extremely helpful, especially to a nonprofit organization, right? Like most of the time, what they have as researchers, what they don't have as business and operators. And what they might not also have, and this is something that I'm sure you can help with too, is access to Western resources and Western connections, right? And so the fact that you can go, spend a few months in Maharashtra and then come back to New Jersey and have, all these institutions in the and bring your credibility to really interface between these sort of continents is it's really powerful, so I just think I think it's wonderful on every single possible surface, is that thing I will say.
No, Spencer. Actually, I agree with you. I think the only place where I would say I would every time I hear someone say that it's giving back, I actually philosophically, of course, it is called giving back, and I
Sure.
totally understand from where you come from. But in my own mind, I don't think there's any giving back, because what I realize is that I do. I mean, at least I can speak for myself. I do only those things where I get something out of it. Of course, I get more out of it. Call it. You know, there's a lot of satisfaction, and there is a lot of I want to do this, right, and I'm
Yeah.
doing it. So the very fact that I'm working on something that is very close to my heart gives me a lot of positive buzz, and that's the reason why I'm doing it. I mean, I sometimes wonder if someone tomorrow comes back and says that, okay, Shashi, let's do one thing. You don't work on it. Someone else will work on it. Who will be more
Mm.
sad? Whether they will be sad because I'm not contributing, or because I will be. I think I will be the
Yeah.
sad person, because I think I'm getting a lot out of this. That's the insight for me personally. Is that this is something. There is a self interest in everything.
If you're a good-natured person and you get endorphins and joy from giving back, is that selfish? And I think that at that point, it's the lines are very blurred. I think it's still, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a few folks that I can think of that now that we're talking about it, that I'd love to make the introduction to after we finish the call, because I have relationships obviously with my two alma maters, which are Harvard and University of Pennsylvania, and they're both, Penn Medicine and Harvard are both big
Yeah.
research institutions. So when the moment's right and you want a warm introduction, I'm happy to make the connection. Maybe there'll be something there.
Absolutely, Spencer. I would really. So going back to your earlier comment on your offer of help. Of course, I'll take any amount of money that you give. That's not the main thing. I think your help would be far more useful in exactly these areas, like helping make the connections, right?
Right.
Because the way we progress forward is that there is a research advisory board, which
Right.
would essentially consist of top-notch researchers from around the world, right, who are helping
Right.
set agenda, right, for this research division. So that's one. So helping, like for example, the introductions that you just talked about with Harvard, right? It could maybe if I can get one or two strong leaders who would be passionate about helping uh, by contributing their research acumen. These are top-notch researchers. I think on the research advisory board, right? I mean, that would be great. Of course, the foundation advisory board, which is more around fundraising and all of that. So folks who can help uh, open doors, right, and who can help. All of that is the foundation advisory board. So again, there could be leaders who could be on that board, but I think it's the connections that are going to be very important, as you very well know, because you did something like this many years back, right? And you know that those are the two big, knowledge and money. I think those are the two that go hand in hand, right?
And access, I mean, I think you're right. The access is really invaluable in any direction. Well, I guess I'm kind of curious if we take a step like way back, we're talking, 30 plus years at this point. You were in Maharashtra in Pune as an engineer, building thermic fluid heaters, which I assume is like a gas-fired boiler. How did you go from the world of engineering to the world of procurement? How did you land at P&G?
Yeah. So I did my engineering. I'm an
Yeah.
electrical engineer, and then my first job was with this company called Thermax. So we had a tie-up with Babcock Wilcox, which is a major boiler manufacturer around the world. And boilers are essentially equipment that you use for heating, right? Heating, process heating. So if you have a company that is doing anything, a manufacturing plant that needs heat, so typically there would be a boiler that is generating steam, and then the steam is used to heat your process, right? So now steam has certain limitations. One of them being that the temperature. If you need a temperature above a certain certain number, then you need to superheat the steam. It becomes a little bit more risky. Of course, you can still have superheated steam, which as you do in power plants and all of that. But then there are what is called as thermic fluid heater. So you heat the thermic fluid. You can go up to 300 degrees Celsius, 400 degrees Celsius, because the fluid doesn't break down at those temperatures, and because you can then run that high temperature fluid through the process to do the heating, right? So that's the work that I used to do. The reason I describe it is because engineering tends to be very, very focused, right? So in the sense, it's very important to specialize if you want to grow in the world of engineering. I joined as because I did my electrical engineering. I joined in the world of instrumentation. So boiler is also a very complex piece of equipment which needs a lot of instrumentation, not just to run it, but also to protect the rest of it can become quite risky if it's not managed well. So I was doing instrumentation, but very quickly, instrumentation for boilers is a very broad field. Very quickly, it became instrumentation for process boilers. Then it became oil and gas fired process boilers, and then it became burners, just the burner part of it, right? So I was becoming super specialized, which is, I think, very much needed in the engineering world. But for
Right.
me as an individual, I felt like I wouldn't want to be spending 30 years or 35 years of my career going deeper and deeper into instrumentation of the nozzle in a burner that fires naphtha, right? And that's the only way you can get good at it. But I felt like that's too specialized for me. So that's where I was fortunate enough to be selected for a master's program in business administration. I still wanted to stay close to my engineering, so I did my industrial management from what is now the Indian Institute of Management in Mumbai. So that's how I moved away from engineering into a broader management field, and then I joined Procter and Gamble in the supply chain procurement. So basically, in the buying for raw materials and packaging materials for some of the businesses for P&G in
Mhm.
Asia. From there, I actually for 4 years I was in marketing. I led the uh,
Interesting.
yeah, for P&G India. Then in 2004, I moved to Moscow to set up the procurement organization for P&G for all of Eastern Europe. My territory at that time extended from Israel on one hand to Pakistan on the other end, and I was based out of Moscow. Fascinating experience. I think all of those countries, we used to call them the CNN countries at that time. Reason was because they were always on CNN for the wrong reasons. So these countries, but for Procter and Gamble, that was a very important, very strategic, and a very fast growing business, and
Right.
procurement a strategic role in that region. So we had to get the currencies right, the
Right.
market up and down. So we had to make sure that our suppliers are as localized as possible. And then most importantly, we had to make sure that our talent is as local as possible. So it was I moved there very early in my life, but I think it was one of those really good decisions that I had made. And I was fortunate to be even selected for a role like that. By I learned and I grew quite a bit
Yeah.
with that 1 4 year assignment of Moscow, and then afterwards I moved to Cincinnati, which is the global headquarters for P&G, in a global category role.
Right. That's amazing. Cincinnati, by contrast, is never on CNBC. So I can only imagine what it was like in Russia at that time. I've only visited once, but it was back in 2019. So way before the stuff with Ukraine, well, the most recent stuff, and then way after the end of the Soviet Union. I'm kind of curious, like when you were at P&G, especially in those early days, did you ever think, as you thought about your career aspirations, you would end up as a chief procurement officer? Because that's a big job. It's a C-suite. I mean, it is a C-suite job at a Fortune 500 company. I mean, that's an amazing, it's like the NBA, the funnel gets so narrow, to get to that echelon is a lottery winning opportunity.
No, I never, Spencer. I mean, I don't think, and I remember, and I said this to the person who I'm referring to. So when this chief procurement officer for P&G used to, every now and they would make a trip to Asia, would come to Singapore, or sometimes they would come to Bombay, and I would host them, or I would go across to Singapore to meet. It was like going and meeting someone who believable that I get to meet this person who's
Yeah.
CEO of P&G and all of that. And I think I was very fortunate that I interacted with some of these CPOs who are really iconic, and I really learned a lot from them, and I looked up to them and all of that. And so it was a little bit, very humbling in a way that, that am I even, so when I became the CPO of J&J, like, can I live up to those standards, right? Was the question, in my mind. And I think I was fortunate. I think some of these decisions that, without complete, it was not like a planned move that I would do this and then I will get to become the CPO of J&J. There was no such plan, but the fact that I was continuously going out of my comfort zone, right? I mean, I was moving out of procurement into marketing, which is a very risky job at P&G because it's up or out in marketing, right? And I had more
Right.
training in marketing. I was a supply chain person going into
Yeah.
marketing, competing with the best marketers in the world, and doing well was a risky proposition. But I at that time did not see it as a risk. I thought that it was just I would have fun, so I just did it.
Yeah.
And then going to Moscow, I mean, now on hindsight, if someone had offered a role like that to me now, I don't know if I would have the courage to accept it. But at that time, I did it, and I learned a lot through those moves. I guess all of that helped in accelerating my career and helping me get to the highest possible level in the function. But I don't think I ever had a plan, but I'm fortunate that I had those opportunities, and I had I could look up. I worked with some of these CPOs who I really could look up to and say that I would want to be someone like that.
Yeah. What do you feel I mean, that's amazing. What do you feel like it takes to become a CPO? I mean, obviously, there's some amount of opportunity, like luck that's involved, but if you were, if you're talking to somebody who's early in their career, who's just starting out as a category manager or buyer, and they say, "Hey, look, I'm doing this because I want to be at that sort of top echelon." Like, what does it take to get to one of those positions?
I think the number one requirement and number one is being very close to the business. I think understanding the business that you are part of. I won't even
Mhm.
say you're supporting because you are part of the business.
Right.
And as I mentioned in Eastern Europe, when I led the procurement organization, we could make or break that business big time. If we all we had to do is get a couple of currencies wrong, and we would
Mhm.
mess up the whole business, and we get them right, we can actually put our business in a really, we can crisis proof our business, right? So we are part of the business. So we need to understand the business really, really well. I think that is a- and I think when you are working in a team, that cross-functional team, if you as a procurement person knows the industries that you buy from really well, you also understand the business inside, and you can communicate, you can converse the way any other function can, like let's say a marketing person can, and you can speak to the consumer insight, you can speak to the business insights, and therefore make the connection to what is possible from the outside world. You
Mm.
become indispensable in that team. I think that's the magic, right? That a good procurement person brings to the table. If I were to advise, and this is what I tell
Yeah.
new procurement leaders, right, is that number one, uh, get as close as possible to the business, and number two is, of course, know your industries well, know your categories, know your strategies, and all of that. I think there's the combination of the two that truly creates magic.
No, it's amazing. And how does somebody get close to the business? Because I think that sometimes, depending on the organization, I think direct materials, you see a little bit less of this because you are really integrated. But in indirect, a lot of times folks will view procurement wrongly, in my opinion, as like an obstacle to just get to buy the thing they wanted to get anyway. So how do you get close to the business if you're coming into a new organization?
I think even in indirect,
Mm.
for example, indirect comes in different categories, right? So, for example, if you're buying media, as an example,
Yep.
you are very, very, embedded in the business. In fact, you would know most of what needs to happen, and you would want to make sure that you are proactively, setting up everything that needs to be from an external perspective to support the initiatives that are so critical to
Yeah.
your business. So media is an example, very deeply embedded.
Right.
R&D is another indirect category. In a pharma company, I don't know if you were to say which is the most important, most embedded, most critical category for the business. They're all important. As a CPO, I would say all categories are important, but I think R&D is really, really, critical.
Right.
Like you're the one who's managing the relationship with the big CROs. You're the one who's managing the relationship with some of those contract research organizations and CDMOs, and you're the so there is a lot that rests on your understanding of what the pipeline is and the capabilities of these suppliers and how you can bring that and how you can communicate that to the table. So I think every category is, and let's take the example of the typical indirect categories like business services, like
Right.
get workforce and travel and all of that. A big part of any business, right, when it comes to their total P&L, you would be surprised as to how big they just add up, right? So if you have the ability to provide options, okay, to the business on a
Mm.
continuous basis, where they can pull levers in these categories and help advance their P&L or advance their opportunities that they see in the market. I think you there can be a significant value driver. You can become a very significant value driver, irrespective of which category you're managing. How to answer the question of how do you get close?
Right.
No easy answer to it. You have to just study the business. You have to become a very strong student. You have to make an effort to make sure that when you go into a meeting, you study the agenda in advance, you do your pre-work,
Yeah.
and make connections, not just on process or procurement process, but also on the business side, and relate that's why articulation is important, and relate the dynamics and the whatever is happening in the outside world to the pipeline discussion, to the financials discussion for the business. I think that if you're able to do it, you will be highly sought after. But that means you have to invest a lot of time in understanding the business. You invest as much time in understanding the business as you do in understanding the external industries.
Thinking about the other side of the coin. So once you've become close to the business, you've embedded yourself really well, you become indispensable as a procurement leader, you get elevated to this position of chief procurement officer. Now you have a bigger purview on your plate. I'm kind of curious, how are chief procurement officers measured? Like, how do people determine who's been, you mentioned there have been some iconic chief CPOs that you had sort of interacted with at P&G. What makes a chief procurement officer a great or an iconic chief procurement officer? And are those measurements, are they consistent across different companies, or are they really unique to the business when you meet with other CPOs?
Yeah, I think when a CPO is evaluated, there are few broad categories that would be common across. So for
Yep.
example, as a CPO, it's not so much about, again, your ability to source something or run an RFP. You don't do all that, right? So that's done by your organization. But I think your strength is in your ability to connect with the senior leadership, okay, in the organization, and represent the function, okay, to those stakeholders. I think that's one. The second is your ability to build a strong organization that can rally,
Right.
for the businesses that they're part of, right? That's the second. I think there's a third aspect which is also becoming important now, actually for the last almost like 10-15 years, is having a very strong digital first
All right.
mindset and modernizing the function. To your point, procurement has unfortunately acquired this fuddy-duddy, image of, we're the process guys, we're the
Mm.
cops, we're the compliance guys. Yes, compliance is important. I'm not saying that that's not important, but I don't think I think procurement needs to step out of this role, that self-assumed role of being the cop, right, to
Right.
being an enabler, right, and therefore modernization of the function, bringing in the best of technology, to drive speed, to drive value. I think that's an important mindset that the CPO will need to bring to the table. So I think that those are the few. So the digital mindset, business orientation, and capability, ability to build strong capability. These are the, I don't think it's a surprise, but those are the three big areas that any CPO, okay, would be measured on. Now, if you go double click on each one of those, that's where the differences arise across sectors. For example, in the pharma industry, it's all about innovation. That's why I said R&D is an important category. If you look at CPG, now, of course, I'm not saying innovation is not important there. It is important there, but costs are extremely critical, right? I mean, these are this is an industry that operates on razor thin margins, right? So, and the sourcing from around the world and all of that. So, in the pharma world, by the way, supplier sustainability and in general, sustainability and making sure that resilience and all of that is critical, because the last thing that you want is a patient who's going through a chemotherapy regimen, has gone through 3 cycles and cannot go through the 4th cycle because some disruption happened somewhere in the region. So resilience is important, right? So I think now if you go to a bank or a financial sector and you're a CPO for a bank or a CPO for a credit card company, then it's risk. That is the primary parameter there, right? So how do you make sure that all the suppliers that you bring in, they're not adding any new risks, okay, to the operation? So risk becomes paramount in that CPO role. So what I'm saying is that the top 3 categories: digital orientation, the business orientation, and capability build, is common. But then what you get measured on will primarily be determined by which business you're in. I gave you examples of 3: pharma, CPG, and financial sectors.
It's interesting. I guess maybe one last question that I'll sort of ask, and I know we're coming up on time. What's something that you feel like I should have asked you that I haven't?
No, I think we talked about my transition from a CPO to my now role, and I talked a lot because I think that's where our conversation went, and it was about the work that I'm doing on the on cancer research with this organization in India. That's 50% of my time. The remaining 50% is still on procurement. I want to talk about this plural career, because I think that's an important, in my mind, as I moved out of my CPO role, that is what I was thinking that I need to do. I don't want to take on another CPO role, but I'm not retiring, but I would want to have a career where I tend to grow not just from a financial perspective, but also grow from just new areas that I can learn and have the ability to work on things that are very close to my heart, right? So, and then how can I do all of it together without compromising on, let's say, the financials and all of that. So that's the strategy that I'm pursuing, what I would call as my plural career approach, where I work with a number of companies, as you know, in advisory capacity. I work with private equity firms, and then I also do the work that I'm doing with the Cancer Institute. So all put together is my portfolio of work, and that's the plural career that I would want to move forward. It's a diversified source of revenues, of financials for me. Also, it's a diversified source of growth opportunities for me, where I tend to grow, right? I mean, I learn something new. Whereas when you're working in one company, there's only one source of revenue and one source of growth. Now I have multiple. I'm not saying that this is the right thing for everyone. I think there's a right time for the. But I think for someone like me, I felt like this was the right time to make the transition to a plural career.
Amazing. And you're simply too young to retire. That's also part of the problem when you get early career success, you know? Well, Shashi, thank you so much for joining the podcast. As always, I truly, truly enjoy our conversations. I'm thrilled to be able to have one of them on the record that we can share with other people, especially about the wonderful work that you're doing at India and abroad in the United States. So yeah, thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you. Thanks, Spencer.